Practice the grip again. It has to look accidental, my daughter-in-law whispered to my son in our basement. I froze at the top of the stairs, watching through my security cameras as they rehearsed my murder. My own son was learning how to electrocute me and stage it as an accident. I never imagined the boy I raised alone would become my executioner. What this 67-year-old retired electrician did next would shock everyone who witnessed the most calculated takedown of a serial killer network in Ohio history. Stay with me until the end, because this story will leave you stunned at how one forgotten detail can turn predators into prey. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. My hands were still steady at 67, steadier than they'd been all morning, because what I just discovered in my workshop had changed everything I thought I knew about my family. But let me start from the beginning, 3 days earlier, when I was just a retired electrician who trusted the people he loved most. Thursday afternoon in Toledo felt like any other autumn day. The October chill crept through my garage windows as I ran my weathered fingers along the newly repaired security camera. Wiring. After 43 years as a master electrician, my eyes needed reading glasses now, but my hands still knew electrical systems better than men half my age. The cameras had been expensive decorations for 2 weeks after a power surge knocked out the main circuit. Today, after 3 careful hours of rewiring, every lens was crystal clear again. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My toolbox had been moved. Not much, maybe 6 inches from where I always kept it. But when you've organized the same workspace for decades, you notice when someone's been going through your things. Screwdrivers weren't in the right order. My wire strippers were in the wrong compartment. Someone had been in my garage searching through my equipment while I was out. I checked the house next. Papers on my bedroom desk looked shuffled. The kitchen drawers weren't quite closed right. 43 years of precision work had trained me to spot when things weren't where they belonged. Someone had been systematically searching my home, and they'd been careful about it. Professional, careful. By 5:30, car doors were slamming in my driveway. Garrett and his wife Sloan arrived for our weekly dinner right on schedule. But something was different about my son tonight. His usual bear hug felt mechanical, and those brown eyes I'd watched grow up couldn't quite meet mine. "Dad, you look tired," Sloan said, settling into her chair with that perfect smile that never seemed to reach her eyes. "Are you feeling all right?" I studied her face as I served the pot roast I'd spent the afternoon preparing. 3 years of marriage to my son, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that Sloan was always performing, always calculating something behind those bright eyes. "Can't complain," I replied, leading them to the dining room. "Been keeping busy with some electrical work around the house. You know how I hate letting things pile up." "Stephen, you work too hard," she continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "A man your age shouldn't be climbing around fixing things. That's what professionals are for." "Professionals charge what I made in a week for work I can do in an afternoon," I said, cutting my meat with deliberate precision. "Besides, keeps these old hands busy." That's when the wine incident happened. Sloan was gesturing with her glass, talking about property values and insurance updates, topics that seemed to fascinate her lately when she knocked over her Merlot. Red wine splashed across my important papers scattered on the side table. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, jumping up to help clean the mess. But as she dabbed at the documents with her napkin, I caught something that made my electrician's instincts spark with warning. She wasn't just cleaning, she was positioning papers, angling them toward her purse, where her phone sat suspiciously ready. The soft click of a camera shutter was barely audible, but after 4 decades of listening for electrical problems, my ears caught it. Sloan was photographing my personal documents while pretending to clean up her accident. Later, as I cleared the dinner dishes, I heard Garrett on his phone in the hallway. His voice was low, nervous, but the house's acoustics carried his words clearly to the kitchen. "No, not yet," he whispered urgently. "He's still not... I can't do this much longer. When do we..." The conversation stopped abruptly when he noticed me approaching. "Everything all right, son?" I asked, studying his pale face. "Just work stuff, Dad. Market's tough right now." But his hands were shaking as he pocketed the phone and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool evening. As they gathered their coats to leave, Sloan made one more comment that would haunt me for days. "Stephen, have you thought about updating your security system? These old cameras probably aren't very reliable anymore." I was about to mention that I'd just spent the afternoon getting the system back in perfect working order when something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd photographed my papers. Maybe it was Garrett's mysterious phone call. Or maybe it was 43 years of troubleshooting problems that had taught me when circuits weren't running right. Instead, I just smiled and said, "I'll think about it." After their car pulled away, I stood in my living room, the house I'd built with these hands in 1995, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of a job well done was my greatest reward, but tonight something else filled that space. Something that felt like the first whisper of a storm I couldn't yet see coming. Something was very wrong, but I had no idea how wrong, until I checked those cameras the next morning. Friday morning arrived with that crisp October clarity that made everything seem sharper, including the dread that had settled in my chest overnight. I was up before dawn with fresh coffee, ready to review what those cameras had captured during yesterday's dinner. After 43 years of troubleshooting electrical problems, I had learned that the best way to catch issues was by observing everything when people thought no one was watching. The multiple monitors in my workshop came to life with satisfying clarity. Every angle of my house displayed in high-definition audio pickup so clear I could hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen. I'd always taken pride in quality installations, and this system rivaled anything professionals charged thousands to install. I started with yesterday's dinner footage, fast-forwarding to the wine incident. There it was, crystal clear. Sloane's accident wasn't accidental at all. The camera captured her deliberately positioning her wine glass before the spill, then systematically photographing my insurance documents, bank statements, and property deeds while pretending to clean up. She'd even taken pictures of my medication bottles and medical records. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was systematic intelligence gathering, but that discovery was nothing compared to what I found next. At 11:47 p.m., long after I'd gone to bed, my front door opened. Garrett and Sloane let themselves in with their key, moving through my house like they owned it. They went straight to my basement workshop, the same room where I now sat watching their betrayal unfold. What I saw next made my blood turn to ice. Sloane was teaching my son how to kill me. "Practice the grip again." Her voice came through crystal clear on the recording. "It has to look accidental. Electrical shock first, then the fall down the stairs. The coroner will see an elderly man who made a fatal mistake with old wiring." On screen, I watched Garrett handle electrical cables, with the clumsy uncertainty of someone learning a deadly skill. Sloane guided his hands, showing him how to create a shock that would incapacitate, but not immediately kill, how to position a body to make a tumble-down concrete steps that look natural. "What if someone investigates?" Garrett's voice was barely a whisper, filled with the kind of fear that comes from crossing lines you can never uncross. "They won't," Sloane replied with the casual confidence of experience. "I've done this before. Trust the process." "I've done this before." Those 5 words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't desperate family greed or a son's momentary weakness. This was a predator who had killed before, and my boy was her latest accomplice. I sat in that workshop surrounded by the tools that had built my life, watching my own son practice my murder. The boy I'd raised alone after his mother died, the child I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework, was learning how to make my death look like an accident. The footage continued for another hour. They practiced the scenario 3 times, discussing timing, cleanup, and alibis with the efficiency of a business meeting. When they finally left at 1:15 a.m., Garrett looked sick to his stomach, but he was still participating. I was still staring at the blank monitors when my doorbell rang at 10 o'clock sharp. Willa Patterson stood on my porch, her weathered face creased with worry. At 72, Willa had been the elementary school principal for 30 years before retirement, and she still had the sharp eyes that missed nothing in her neighborhood. "Arden, I've seen that car 3 times this week," she said without preamble, pointing to a dark sedan parked 2 blocks down. "Same license plate, different times a day. Someone's watching your house." I looked where she pointed and felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. The surveillance wasn't just from inside my family. There were others involved, professionals, who knew how to conduct reconnaissance without being obvious. "Willa," I said carefully, "how long have you been watching them watch me?" Her smile was grim but determined. "Long enough to know you're in trouble, and long enough to know you're going to need help." As we stood on my porch in the morning sunlight, I realized the scope of what I was facing. This isn't my son anymore, I thought, remembering the stranger on those recordings who bore Garrett's face, but had learned to plan murder with professional efficiency. But the murder practice was just the beginning. What I'd discovered next made me realize I wasn't dealing with desperate family, I was facing professional killers. After Willa left, I stood in my kitchen staring at the coffee maker that had been my morning ritual for 20 years. Something about Sloane's professional confidence on those recordings nagged at me. How does someone learn to plan murder with such casual efficiency? The answer came to me with the clarity of a perfectly wired circuit practice. I poured yesterday's leftover coffee into a mason jar and drove to the community college chemistry lab, where my neighbor's daughter worked as a teaching assistant. $20 and a favor later, I had my answer. Lorazepam, a sedative that dissolves easily in hot liquids, causes drowsiness and confusion, and would explain why I'd been feeling unusually tired after our recent dinners. They hadn't just been planning my murder, they'd been conditioning me for it, making me weaker and more vulnerable with each visit. The systematic nature of it chilled me more than the betrayal itself. Back home, I started digging into Garrett's supposed gambling problem. If Sloan was professional enough to drug me slowly over weeks, I doubted anything else about their story was genuine. 3 phone calls to credit agencies and a background check website confirmed my suspicions. Garrett had no outstanding debts, no gambling history, no financial pressures that would drive a son to patricide. The gambling story was as fake as everything else about this nightmare. At 2 o'clock, I was reviewing more security footage when I heard Sloane's voice through the kitchen window. She was in my backyard pacing while talking on her phone, with the confidence of someone who thought she was unobserved. Toledo target confirmed, same as Cleveland method, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the autumn air. Yes, electrical accident in the basement workshop. Saturday evening, just like we discussed. I pressed record on my phone, capturing every word. The sedatives should make Saturday easier, she continued. He's been more compliant lately, less suspicious. Cleveland went perfectly. Toledo will, too. Cleveland. Another victim. Another elderly man who trusted the wrong people and paid with his life. My hands shook as I realized I wasn't her first target. I was just the latest, in what sounded like a successful series of murders. Cleanup crew will be there by midnight, Sloane's voice continued. Make it look natural, just like Harold Peterson. The old fool never saw it coming. Harold Peterson, a name I could research, a victim whose death might provide clues about how this network operated. When the call ended, I waited until her car disappeared before starting my search. Reverse phone lookup gave me her number's registration. Not Sloane McClure, but Celeste Thorne. The name change itself was suspicious, but what I found next made my blood run cold. Celeste Thorne was wanted for questioning in 3 Ohio cities, Cleveland, Columbus, and Akron. All 3 cases involved elderly men who died in apparent accidents after recently updating their wills. All 3 men had been found in their basements after what appeared to be electrical mishaps. Harold Peterson, age 71, Cleveland. Electrical shock and fall down basement stairs. Robert Martinez, age 68, Columbus. Electrical fire and smoke inhalation in home workshop. William Thompson, age 73, Akron. Electrical shock while working on home repairs. The pattern was unmistakable. Celeste Thorne was a serial killer who specialized in elderly men, and she'd perfected a method that left no evidence of foul play. Local coroners had ruled all 3 deaths accidental. Insurance companies had paid out without investigation. Families had grieved and moved on, never knowing their loved ones had been murdered. I printed every article, every police report, every obituary I could find. The woman who'd been sitting at my dinner table complimenting my pot roast and asking about my insurance policies had killed at least 3 men that I could document. How many others were there? How many families had she destroyed with her calculated predation? The most chilling detail was the timeline. Each murder had occurred exactly 6 months apart, with meticulous planning and flawless execution. According to the pattern, I was right on schedule to become victim number 4. As 4 o'clock shadows lengthened across my kitchen table, I stared at the evidence spread before me. Photos of dead men who looked like me. Police reports describing accidents that weren't accidents. A woman who'd turned elder murder into a profitable profession. I'd been such a fool, I thought, remembering how charmed I'd been by her attention to Garrett, how grateful I'd felt that my troubled son had found someone who seemed to care about him. But Garrett wasn't her husband. He was her accomplice. And I wasn't her father-in-law. I was her target. Saturday was 2 days away. I had 48 hours to stop a serial killer who had never failed before. Sunday morning found me pacing Willa's living room, surrounded by the evidence I'd gathered against Celeste Thorne. The comfortable suburban home with its doilies and family photos seemed an unlikely command center for stopping the serial killer. But as Willa poured coffee and spread my research across her dining table, I realized there was more to my neighbor than 30 years of elementary school principling. Arden, she said, settling into her chair with the authority of someone used to difficult conversations. I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible, but I need you to trust me completely. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a federal badge that caught the morning light. Special Agent Willa Patterson, FBI Elder Crimes Unit. I've been tracking Celeste Thorne for 2 years. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor, but I barely noticed. My 72-year-old neighbor, the woman who brought me casseroles when I had the flu and borrowed my hedge trimmer every spring, was a federal agent. 2 years, I managed to whisper. Harold Peterson in Cleveland was my partner's father-in-law. She explained, her voice carrying the weight of personal loss. When we realized his accident was actually murder, I volunteered for deep cover. We knew she'd strike again, but we needed to catch her in the act. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a well-wired circuit. Willa's watchful presence in the neighborhood, her immediate recognition of surveillance, her calm competence when I'd told her about my suspicions. She hadn't just been a concerned neighbor, she'd been protecting me. I've been tracking her network across Ohio, Willa continued. But she's careful professional. We needed someone on the inside, someone she'd target naturally. When she moved into your neighborhood 3 months ago and started the courtship phase with Garrett, we knew you were next. By 10:30, we were in Catherine Sullivan's law office downtown. Catherine came highly recommended by Willa, specializing in elder law and criminal defense. Her office walls displayed impressive credentials and community service awards that should have been reassuring. Mr. McClure, Catherine said, reviewing the evidence with professional efficiency, what you've uncovered is extraordinary. This woman has created a sophisticated elder abuse operation with multiple homicides. We need to move quickly. She outlined a strategy involving immediate protective custody, federal warrants, and coordinated arrests. Her plan was comprehensive, professional, and oddly urgent. How soon can we implement this? She asked, leaning forward, with an intensity that struck me as excessive. Catherine, Willa interjected smoothly, let's make sure we have all our ducks in a row first. Arden, didn't you mention wanting a medical evaluation to protect against competency challenges? At noon, Dr. Hamilton's familiar office provided a welcome return to normalcy. I'd been seeing him for 15 years, and his concern was genuine rather than calculated. Stephen, your cognitive function is excellent for any age, he said after a thorough examination. Better than most men 20 years younger. What you've described isn't paranoia or confusion. It's survival instinct responding to a real threat. He signed the official documentation with the authority of decades of medical practice. This evaluation will protect you against any claims of diminished capacity. Your mind is sharp, your memory accurate, and your judgment sound. Walking back to Willa's house, I felt something approaching hope for the first time in days. I had a federal agent on my side, legal representation, and medical documentation of my competency. The trap was turning. But Willa's expression was troubled as we reviewed Catherine's eagerness to move immediately. Trust no one else, Arden, she said quietly as we sat in her kitchen. This network runs deep. Catherine's pushing too hard too fast. Real federal operations take time, proper warrants, careful coordination. Her timeline feels wrong. You think she's compromised. I think Celeste has been planning this for 2 years, and she's had time to place people in positions where they could help or hinder an investigation. We proceed with extreme caution from here. As 2 o'clock shadows lengthened across Willa's kitchen table, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I would trust Willa completely, and everyone else not at all. If Celeste's network was as sophisticated as it appeared, then paranoia wasn't a weakness. It was survival. What's our next move? I asked. Willa's smile was grim but determined. We give Celeste exactly what she expects, a confused old man walking into her trap. But this time, the trap has teeth. I had an FBI agent on my side, but Celeste had been ahead of us for 2 years. Was I walking into another trap? Monday morning brought Catherine Sullivan's urgent phone call before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Her voice carried an intensity that immediately raised the red flags Willa had warned me about. Arden, I've been thinking about your situation all night, she said, her words tumbling out faster than necessary. We need to move fast. Tonight, if possible. Every hour we delay gives Celeste more opportunity to execute her plan. I sat in my kitchen, listening to her push for immediate action while remembering Willa's cautioning words about proper federal procedures taking time. Real investigations required warrants, coordination, careful planning. Catherine's timeline felt like someone trying to force a rushed electrical job, dangerous and likely to fail. Catherine, I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but shouldn't we coordinate with the FBI agent Patterson mentioned proper procedures? Agent Patterson, Catherine's voice sharpened. Arden, I think you may be confused. Willa Patterson is a retired school principal, not an FBI agent. Are you feeling all right? The lie came so smoothly, so convincingly, that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined yesterday's revelations. But 43 years of troubleshooting had taught me to trust my instruments, and every instinct I had was screaming warnings about Catherine Sullivan. "You're right," I said, forcing confusion into my voice. I must have misunderstood something. These old ears aren't what they used to be. "That's perfectly understandable," Catherine replied, her tone becoming patronizing. "Stress can cause confusion in men your age. That's why we need to act quickly before you become more disoriented." After hanging up, I called Willa immediately. Within an hour, we were implementing a test that would reveal whether Catherine could be trusted. "We're going to feed her false information," Willa explained as we sat in her kitchen FBI surveillance equipment, spread across the table like pieces of an electronic puzzle. "If she's compromised, that information will reach Celeste within hours." At 11:30, I called Catherine back with carefully crafted misinformation. "Catherine, I need to tell you something important," I said, injecting urgency into my voice. "I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. We should move tonight. But there's something else I've been hiding cash in my basement workshop. About $50,000 that Celeste doesn't know about. If something happens to me, I want to make sure it doesn't fall into her hands." Catherine's interest was immediate and intense. "50,000, Arden, that's significant. We need to secure that money as evidence. Can you move it to a safer location?" "I was thinking of putting it in my bedroom closet behind the winter coats," I said. "Nobody would think to look there." "Excellent idea," Catherine agreed. "Move it today and we'll coordinate the arrest for tonight." By 1 o'clock, Willa's surveillance equipment had intercepted the call that confirmed our worst suspicions. "She's been feeding them information for months." Willa said, her face grim as she played back the recording. Catherine's voice was clear through the speakers, talking to someone with the casual familiarity of long-term collaboration. "The old man has 50,000 hidden in his bedroom closet now," Catherine was saying. "Behind the winter coats. Make sure your people know that money doesn't go into evidence." "Understood," came the reply in a gravelly voice I didn't recognize. "Saturday night cleanup confirmed. Make it look natural, just like the others." "Saturday night?" Catherine's voice carried surprise. "I thought we were moving tonight." "Change of plans. Celeste wants more time to position everything perfectly. Saturday night, 10 p.m. The old man will be alone, confused and easy to handle." Willa stopped the recording and looked at me with the professional calm of someone who'd spent decades dealing with criminals. "Knox Hartwell," she said. "We've been trying to get evidence on him for years. He's Celeste's cleanup specialist, handles the technical side of making murders look like accidents." The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with terrifying clarity. Catherine hadn't just been compromised, she'd been part of the network from the beginning, feeding information about potential victims, legal vulnerabilities, and law enforcement activities. "How long?" I asked. "Based on what we just heard, probably since she started practicing elder law 5 years ago. She's been the perfect inside source, respected, trusted, with access to vulnerable clients and their financial information." As 3 o'clock shadows lengthened across Willa's kitchen, I realized how close I'd come to walking into another trap. If I'd trusted Catherine's urgency, if I'd moved that fictional money to my bedroom, I would have been setting myself up for exactly the kind of confused old man scenario that had killed Harold Peterson and the others. But now I had something Celeste didn't expect: real intelligence about her operation, a genuine federal agent, and most importantly, the knowledge that Saturday night was when they planned to strike. Saturday night was 5 days away, I said, feeling a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. But now I knew something Celeste didn't. I had a real FBI agent, and we were going to be ready. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that comes before a storm. I was up before dawn, coffee in hand, ready to transform my home into the most sophisticated trap I'd ever built. After 43 years of electrical work, I'd wired everything from suburban houses to industrial complexes, but nothing had ever mattered as much as getting this installation perfect. The basement workshop where Celeste planned to kill me needed additional coverage. I installed 2 micro cameras in the ceiling joists, positioning them to capture every angle where they planned to stage my accident. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd chosen the one room in the house where I had complete technical advantage, surrounded by the tools and expertise that had built my life. Every angle covered, every sound recorded, I murmured, adjusting the final camera position with the precision of a master craftsman. The workshop that had been my sanctuary for decades was now becoming Celeste's trap and mine. By 10 o'clock, my quiet suburban street had been transformed into a federal operations zone, though you'd never know it from casual observation. Willa coordinated with tactical precision as FBI agents positioned themselves in seemingly natural locations. The mail truck that lingered a bit too long was actually Agent Morrison. The cable repair van across the street contained a full surveillance team. Mrs. Henderson's visiting nephew was a sharpshooter with 20 years of federal service. "Rehearsal complete," Willa reported as we reviewed the tactical positions from my kitchen window. Every exit covered, every angle monitored. When Knox Hartwell arrives Saturday night, he'll be walking into a web he can't escape. The professional competence surrounding me was reassuring, but I knew the success of this operation would ultimately depend on my performance. I had to convince Celeste and Garrett that I was still the confused, trusting old man they expected to murder. At 2 o'clock, I ran final equipment checks on backup systems I'd installed throughout the house. Cloud storage ensured that even if they destroyed my primary equipment, the evidence would survive in multiple locations. Battery backups guaranteed continuous recording, even if they cut the power. Redundant audio systems meant every whispered conversation would be captured. 43 years of troubleshooting had taught me that the most important rule of electrical work was always having a backup plan. Today I had 3. As 5:30 approached, I felt the familiar pre-performance tension that reminded me of high school theater, back when I'd played the elderly grandfather in our senior production. Tonight, I'd be playing the same role, but the stakes were life and death rather than applause. Garrett and Sloan arrived precisely on schedule, their punctuality as calculated as everything else about this nightmare. I embraced my son with the same warmth I'd shown for 34 years, though now I was studying his face for signs of the killer he'd become. "Dad, you look good," Garrett said, but his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. The guilt was eating him alive, which gave me hope that somewhere inside my real son still existed. Sloane's performance was flawless, as always. "Stephen, you've been on my mind all week. I hope you're not worrying about anything unnecessarily." "Just the usual old man concerns," I replied, serving the pot roast I'd spent the afternoon preparing. "Property taxes, doctor appointments, whether I remembered to lock the doors." During dinner, I maintained the facade of mild confusion that had served me so well. I repeated a story about Mrs. Patterson's cat, asked Garrett about job interviews that didn't exist, and generally played the part of a man whose mental sharpness was declining with age. But as they prepared to leave, Sloane stepped onto the back porch to make what she thought was a private phone call. My enhanced audio system captured every word with crystal clarity. "Knox confirms 10 p.m. Saturday," she said, her voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd never been caught. "Clean job, no traces. Make it look like the old fool finally made a fatal mistake with his electrical hobby." "Understood," came Knox's gravelly reply through the speaker. "Saturday night cleanup, same as Cleveland. The basement workshop setup is perfect. Lots of old wiring. Plenty of opportunity for accidents." "He suspects nothing?" Sloane continued. "Still the same trusting old man who welcomed me into his family. This will be our cleanest job yet." As their car pulled away, I stood in my kitchen surrounded by federal agents and surveillance equipment, feeling something I hadn't experienced since my Army days, the calm confidence that comes from superior preparation facing an overconfident enemy. Tomorrow night, this ends, I thought, watching their taillights disappear into the suburban darkness. In 24 hours, either I'd be dead in my basement or Celeste Thorne's killing spree would finally end. Friday afternoon brought the kind of electric tension that fills the air before a thunderstorm. By 4 o'clock, my house had become the nerve center of a federal operation that would either end Celeste Thorne's killing spree or claim me as her 4th victim. "All units in position," Willa's voice crackled through the earpiece she'd given me that morning. "Communication systems active. We've got you covered, Arden." I stood in my kitchen surrounded by the normalcy of everyday life. Coffee cups in the sink mail on the counter, the evening news playing softly on the television while federal agents monitored every entrance to my property. The contrast between domestic routine and tactical operation felt surreal, like living inside 2 different movies at once. "Remember," Willa continued through the comm system, "they're expecting Saturday night at 10. We have 18 hours to maintain normal appearance while staying ready for anything." But at 6 o'clock sharp, everything changed. Knox Hartwell's arrival shattered our timeline like a hammer through glass. The dark sedan that pulled up across the street wasn't supposed to be there for another 28 hours. Through my window, I watched a man in his 50s emerge from the driver's seat, moving with the professional efficiency of someone conducting reconnaissance. "Willa," I whispered into my microphone, "we have a problem." "I see him," came her immediate reply. "Knox Hartwell early for surveillance. This changes everything. They may be moving up their timeline." My blood turned cold as I watched Knox walk the perimeter of my property, noting sightlines, escape routes, and potential complications with the methodical thoroughness of a man who'd done this before. He was mapping my death with the same precision I'd used to wire a house. At 7 o'clock, the situation escalated beyond our worst-case scenarios. Garrett and Celeste's car turned into my driveway, a full day ahead of schedule. They moved with purpose rather than their usual casual family visit demeanor, and I knew immediately that our carefully planned Saturday night operation had just become a Friday evening crisis. "Dad, we thought we'd check on you early," Garrett called out as I opened the front door, his voice carrying false concern that couldn't mask the underlying tension. His hands were shaking and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October evening. Celeste's smile was as perfect and predatory as always, but her eyes held the focused intensity of a hunter moving in for the kill. "Stephen, you look tired. Have you been getting enough rest?" "I'm fine," I replied, stepping back to let them in while my mind raced through tactical adjustments. The FBI was positioned for Saturday night. Our communication protocols were designed for a different timeline. Everything we'd planned was suddenly improvised. Crisis escalation. I whispered into my microphone as they settled into the living room. "They're here now. Timeline accelerated." Willa's response was immediate and professional. "Confirmed. All units adapting to new timeline. Maintain normal behavior. We're adjusting positions now." But I could hear the tension in her voice. 18 hours of preparation time had just become 18 minutes of crisis management. At 8 o'clock, Celeste made the suggestion I'd been dreading. "Stephen, I noticed some electrical issues in your basement workshop when we were here last week," she said with casual concern that felt like ice water in my veins. "Maybe you should take a look while we're here to help if something goes wrong." This was it, the moment when their murder plan shifted from preparation to execution. They weren't waiting for Saturday night, they were moving now while they thought they had the advantage of surprise. Garrett looked sick to his stomach, but he nodded along with Celeste's suggestion. "Dad, maybe we should check those circuits. You know how dangerous old wiring can be." I stood in my living room surrounded by the tools and memories of a lifetime, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether I lived to see another sunrise. The basement workshop, where I'd spent countless hours building and repairing, was about to become either my tomb or Celeste's trap. "You're right," I said, forcing calm into my voice while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Let's take a look." As I walked toward the basement stairs, Willa's voice came through my earpiece one final time. "We're moving into position. Whatever happens next, remember, you're not alone." But as I reached for the basement door handle, I knew the truth. In that workshop surrounded by the electrical systems where they planned to stage my accident, I would be completely alone with two people who'd already practiced my murder. As I walked down to that basement workshop where they planned to kill me, I knew this was it. Either justice would be served, or I'd become victim number 4. The basement workshop felt different as I descended those familiar stairs, knowing that in the next few minutes either justice would triumph, or I'd become another accidental victim in Celeste Thorne's killing spree. The tools that had built my life surrounded me like old friends, but tonight they were witnesses to what might be my final moments. "Dad, maybe you should check that outlet over there," Garrett said, his voice barely steady as he pointed to the corner where they'd practiced staging my electrocution. His hands trembled as he spoke, and I could see the internal war raging behind his eyes. Celeste moved with predatory grace, positioning herself between me and the stairs, while maintaining her mask of concerned daughter-in-law. "Stephen, you really should be more careful with these old electrical systems. Accidents happen so easily." That's when I made the decision that would end her killing spree forever. "You know what, Celeste," I said, turning to face her with 43 years of electrical expertise and 2 weeks of strategic planning behind me. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my phone, pressing play on the recording I'd queued up that morning. Her voice filled the basement workshop with crystal clarity. "Practice the grip again. It has to look accidental. Electrical shock first, then the fall down the stairs." The mask slipped from Celeste's face like a switch being thrown. The sweet, caring woman disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating that belonged in a maximum security prison. "You think you're so clever with your little cameras?" She snarled, her voice dropping to the predatory tone I'd heard on the recordings. "Harold Peterson thought he was clever too. So did Robert Martinez and William Thompson. They're all dead, and you're about to join them." "Actually," I said, feeling calmer than I had in weeks, "I think you'll find this situation is quite different from your previous murders." I played another recording, this one from Monday's intercepted phone call. "Saturday night cleanup confirmed. Make it look natural just like the others." Garrett's face went white as he heard Knox Hartwell's voice coordinating the cleanup operation. "Celeste, you never told me about cleanup crews. You said it would just look like an accident." "Shut up, you pathetic fool. Celeste snapped, her professional composure completely shattered. You knew exactly what this was. Harold Peterson, Dorothy Mitchell, Robert Martinez, I told you about all of them. You've been my accomplice from the beginning. That's not true. Garrett's voice cracked with desperation. You said they were just insurance scams, that nobody got hurt. At 9:30 sharp, the basement door opened, and Knox Hartwell descended the stairs. He was exactly what I'd expected from his voice, a man in his 50s, with the cold efficiency of someone who'd spent decades cleaning up other people's crimes. The gun in his hand wasn't unexpected, but it still sent ice through my veins. Problems? Knox asked Celeste, his gravelly voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. The old man recorded us, Celeste replied. We need to make this look like a break-in gone wrong instead of an electrical accident. Knox nodded with professional acceptance. Messier but manageable. Same end result. That's when Garrett surprised everyone in the room, including himself. No, he said, stepping between Knox's gun and me. Dad, I'm sorry. She said she'd kill my real family if I didn't help her. My ex-wife and daughter in Phoenix. She showed me photos. Of them, knew where they lived, what schools Emma attended. I thought I was protecting them. The gun swung toward Garrett, but before Knox could pull the trigger, my basement erupted with federal agents. FBI, drop your weapons! Willa's voice cut through the chaos like a sword, as tactical team members poured down the stairs with military precision. Knox's gun clattered to the concrete floor as 3 agents tackled him simultaneously. Celeste made a desperate lunge for the back door, but Agent Morrison was waiting. Celeste Thorne, you're under arrest for the murders of Harold Peterson, Dorothy Mitchell, Robert Martinez, and conspiracy to commit murder. Morrison announced, snapping handcuffs on her wrists with the satisfaction of someone who'd been hunting her for years. This is impossible, Celeste screamed as they led her toward the stairs. You're just a confused old man. The plan was perfect. Some old fools know how to fight back, I said, watching her face contort with rage and disbelief. The next 30 minutes were a blur of Miranda rights, evidence collection, and coordinated arrests. Knox Hartwell was taken into custody without further resistance, his professional demeanor cracking as he realized his 20-year criminal career was over. Through my workshop windows, I could see additional arrests taking place, Catherine Sullivan being led away from her car, other network members being rounded up in simultaneous operations across the city. Garrett sat on my workbench, his head in his hands, as Agent Morrison explained his options. Your cooperation and the recordings your father gathered will be taken into consideration, Morrison said. The coercion regarding your family creates mitigating circumstances, but you'll still face charges for conspiracy. I understand, Garrett whispered. I just want my daughter to be safe. She already is, Morrison replied. We've had protective custody on your ex-wife and daughter since Tuesday. Celeste's threats were real, but they're over now. As 10:30 approached and the last of the evidence was catalogued, I found myself standing in my workshop surrounded by federal agents and the debris of a criminal network that had terrorized elderly victims across multiple states. The room where Celeste had planned to stage my death had become the place where her killing spree finally ended. Willa approached as the tactical team began clearing out. It's over, Arden, she said, her professional mask softening into genuine warmth. Celeste Thorne's network is finished. You didn't just save your own life, you've prevented dozens of future murders. But as they led Celeste away in handcuffs, her screaming threats echoing through my suburban neighborhood, I realized this was just the beginning of something much bigger. 3 months after that Friday night confrontation in my basement workshop, I sat in the gallery of a federal courthouse, watching Celeste Thorne receive the justice that Harold Peterson, Dorothy Mitchell, and Robert Martinez would never see. The woman who'd sat at my dinner table complimenting my pot roast while planning my murder now stood in orange prison clothes as the judge delivered her sentence. Your calculated predation on vulnerable seniors represents the worst of human nature. Federal Judge Patricia Williams said, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. You turned trust into a weapon, love into a trap, and family bonds into opportunities for murder. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Celeste's mask had finally slipped completely. Gone was the charming daughter-in-law who'd fooled me for months. In her place stood a woman whose cold eyes held no remorse, only calculation about appeals and technicalities that would never come to fruition. Knox Hartwell's sentencing followed immediately afterward. 25 years for his role as the network's cleanup specialist, for turning crime scenes into believable accidents, for enabling a killing spree that had terrorized elderly communities across multiple states. The court recognizes that without your technical expertise, these murders could not have been disguised as accidents. Judge Williams continued, your sentence reflects not just your direct participation, but your role in facilitating a criminal enterprise that preyed upon our most vulnerable citizens. As I walked out of that courthouse Willa beside me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my Army days, the deep satisfaction that comes from a mission completed successfully. But more than that, I felt the stirring of a new purpose that would define the rest of my life. 1 week later, I stood in the community center where I had attended countless town halls and neighborhood meetings. But this time, I was the one behind the podium. 23 seniors had responded to my invitation to learn about protecting themselves from predators who specialized in elder abuse. Age isn't vulnerability, it's accumulated wisdom, I told them, looking out at faces that reflected decades of life experience. What happened to me could happen to any of us, but it doesn't have to. We have tools, knowledge, and most importantly, we have each other. The workshop covered everything I'd learned the hard way, recognizing manipulation tactics, securing financial information, installing basic security systems, and most crucially, trusting the instincts that come with a lifetime of reading people and situations. 2 weeks after that first workshop, Willa approached me with an opportunity that would expand our impact beyond Toledo. The FBI Elder Crimes Unit wants to partner with you, she said, spreading official documents across my kitchen table. Your story, your approach, your workshop model, they want to make it a national program. Federal funding, professional support training materials for law enforcement agencies across the country. You've turned personal trauma into community purpose, she continued. That's not just surviving Arden, that's triumph. The partnership transformed my basement workshop from a crime scene into a training center. The room where Celeste had planned to stage my death became the place where we taught other seniors how to recognize and resist predators who assumed they were helpless. 1 month after our FBI partnership launched, I watched 20 seniors graduate from our first intensive protection workshop. Among them was Margaret Foster, a 78-year-old widow whose grandson had been pressuring her to sign over her house. You saved my life by teaching me to trust my instincts, Margaret told me after the graduation ceremony. I was starting to think I was just being paranoid about Kevin's behavior. Now I know paranoia is just preparation when someone's actually trying to hurt you. Her words reminded me why this work mattered. Each senior who learned to defend themselves disproved Celeste's terrible assumption that elderly people were disposable obstacles to wealth. The letters began arriving within weeks of our first media coverage. Hundreds of notes from families across the country who'd heard our story and found the courage to question suspicious behavior in their own lives. An elderly man in Florida wrote that our example had empowered him to confront a caregiver who'd been stealing from him. A woman in Oregon discovered her nephew's financial manipulation after attending a workshop modeled on our program. A grandfather in Texas prevented what would have been a successful inheritance scam by applying the warning signs we'd identified. Each letter was a daily reminder that Celeste's network had been more than just a criminal enterprise. It had been a symptom of a larger problem that required a community solution. Elder abuse happened because society assumed age equals helplessness. Our workshops proved that experience, preparation, and mutual support created an unbeatable combination. Standing in my transformed basement 6 months after the confrontation, surrounded by security equipment that now served as training tools rather than surveillance necessities, I realized how completely my life had changed. The man who'd been marked for death had become a voice for protection, turning personal survival into community empowerment. The workshop schedule was booked solid for the next 6 months. FBI partnerships were expanding to 12 states. Media requests came in daily from news programs wanting to feature our elder protection model. But the most important lesson was still to come. 6 months after the confrontation that changed my life, I stood in my basement workshop, the same room where Celeste Thorne had planned to stage my death, watching 22 seniors learn how to install basic security cameras. The basement where they planned my death became the place where we teach life protection, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the full story. My calendar was fuller now than it had been during my working years. Security consultations filled my mornings. Workshop sessions occupied my afternoons, and evenings were spent answering letters from families across America who'd found courage in my story. At 67, I discovered that retirement didn't mean the end of purpose. It meant the beginning of the most meaningful work of my life. Every Tuesday, our Community Elder Protection Network gathered at the community center. What had started as a small group of concerned neighbors had grown into a 40-member organization that monitored suspicious activity, shared resources, and provided mutual support. Mrs. Patterson, now fully recovered from the stress of those dangerous weeks, had become our unofficial coordinator. Family isn't always blood, I told the group during one particularly emotional meeting. Sometimes it's the community that chooses to protect you when your real family fails. My monthly reports to the FBI Elder Crimes Unit tracked our growing impact. Our workshop model had been adopted in 12 states, with more requesting training materials every week. Willa, now promoted to senior agent, often joked that I'd become the Bureau's most effective unpaid consultant. The letters continued to arrive daily, each one a reminder of why this work mattered. A grandmother in Seattle wrote that our story had given her courage to question her grandson's suspicious behavior, ultimately preventing a financial scam that would have cost her life savings. A widower in Atlanta credited our workshop techniques with helping him recognize and report a caregiver who'd been stealing his medication. Your story gave me courage to question what I knew was wrong. One letter read, I'm not a victim anymore, I'm a survivor who helps other survivors. But perhaps the most profound transformation was spiritual. Standing in my workshop each morning, surrounded by the tools that had built my life and now served to protect others, I often reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Sometimes God places us in situations that test our faith in humanity itself. The betrayal I'd experienced from Garrett and Celeste had shaken my belief in family trust and the basic goodness of people. But the community that had rallied around me, the seniors who found strength in our workshops, and the families who'd been protected by our example, had restored something deeper than faith. They'd given me hope. The greatest victory wasn't surviving Celeste's murder plot. It was discovering that the truest family had been waiting in my community all along, ready to appreciate what I had to offer, rather than exploit what I possessed. Your wisdom matters. Your experience has value. And sometimes the greatest victories come from the battles we never wanted to fight. Arden's story teaches us that betrayal stories like this reveal profound truths about trust, family, and survival. When family betrayal strikes at its deepest level, a son planning his father's murder, it shatters our most fundamental beliefs about love and loyalty. Yet these betrayal stories also show us that wisdom and preparation can triumph over deception. The most important lesson from this family betrayal is that age brings accumulated experience, not vulnerability. Arden's technical skills, built over decades, became his greatest weapon against those who underestimated him. His story proves that predators target the elderly because they assume helplessness, but they're often wrong. Family betrayal cuts deepest because it violates our most sacred trust. But Arden discovered something beautiful when family fails us. Chosen family neighbors, community members, people who value our wisdom can provide the love and protection we deserve. His transformation from victim to community protector shows that betrayal stories can become empowerment stories. The technical precision Arden used to wire houses for 40 years became the same methodical approach that saved his life and exposed a criminal network. Sometimes our professional skills become our survival tools in ways we never imagined. Most powerfully, Arden's journey reminds us that our greatest victories often emerge from battles we never wanted to fight. Betrayal stories teach us that survival isn't just about living, it's about finding purpose in our pain. What's your take on this incredible story? Have you experienced situations where your life experience helped you recognize danger others missed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more inspiring stories of resilience, and let us know where you're listening from.